All right. So the first thing I want to talk about is a little bit more of how do you know that it's more than them just being stuck? How do you know if it's developing into an addiction, right? Because a big point I've made is I don't see young people who want to be stuck, right? They're not happy living in your basement, living off your bank account, living in their apartment. And yes, that might seem like they're okay with it, but underneath, every time I've gotten into kind of the mind and the heart of that young person, this is not what they want, right? There's something more going on. And often it's they're overwhelmed, they're heartbroken, they're defeated, and they don't know how to move forward. Um, so when that's the case, and you can kind of speak to their heart, give them some ideas, give them some hope, and the things turn around, right? But then, how do you know when it's getting into that addiction point? I thought about this, and it kind of came to me because no matter what point that I'm going to bring up, it's all going to come down to this: when the discussion or the focus of your child is more about maintaining their behavior, their addictive behavior. So I'm talking about their internet use, their weed, their whatever substance it is, whatever it is. When the focus is about keeping that behavior, that addictive behavior, uh, that's your main sign, right? So everything that, like even when they're lying or they're avoiding, right? It's not they're not lying or avoiding or misrepresenting to keep from moving forward, right? They don't want to get that job because it makes them too anxious, or they don't want to face that situation because whatever the reason is, right? Their avoidance and their resistance is about not taking steps forward, right? That's the classic stuck. But when the conversation is not about avoiding taking steps, it's about how do I keep using the thing that I'm using, right? That's when you want to start considering that this is getting, how would I say, just severe. So the lies are about how do I keep going, and then the other behaviors you see are extreme versions of that, right? You see them fearing that they're going to lose their screens, they're going to lose their internet, they're going to lose their weed or their substance, or they're not going to be able to do it anymore. And you see that antsiness, you see that panic, you see that resistance, that fight, that whatever it is, because the focus was about losing the substance or the addictive behavior. All right, so I think I made that point clear. And then we can certainly talk a lot more about it, but everything kind of goes in that direction. Couple of points I want to make. There are some foundational points, if you will, that you want to think about when you're dealing with addiction. So we're talking about your adult child or your older teen child is you're saying, okay, they are really showing all these signs of addiction, right? Addiction and escapism, right? It's kind of um, a spectrum, if you will. They start off by escaping, and then it gets into addiction, but all of that is really unhealthy coping mechanisms that have gone too far. Right? It was they're trying to cope. They're trying to not deal with life. They're trying to relax. They're trying not to feel anxious. They're whatever it is, they're trying to cope. And it was unhealthy, but then it got to an extreme where it took over. But at the heart of it, it's coping. And that's the point. That's the first point I want to make is if you just rip away their coping mechanism, they're going to panic. They're going to be lost. We got to realize there's a reason it started in the first place, and we need to be sensitive to that. We're not saying it's okay, right? But we need to understand it was there for a reason. And then the other point I want to make is expecting denial, right? There will be a sense of wanting to pretend that this isn't really a problem, that everything's okay, that they're in control. You've probably heard those things before. And the acronym that we often say with denial is don't even know I'm lying, right? They've created this belief system that they are okay, they're in control, everything is fine, and that's a way of kind of preserving their dignity, their pride, their sanity, their self-esteem, right? Because nobody wants to admit that their life is that out of control, that it's causing that much trouble, and so that's where that denial is. And the point I want to emphasize with that is many times they don't even know they're lying to themselves, right? Because they've believed this. They don't realize how severe it is because it's been progressive. You're looking at it like, dude, you are on the internet constantly. Every second you get, you just go right back to it. You avoid everything. This is a problem. But to them, they might not see it that way. They might not want to look at it that way. So those are some important foundational points as we get into this. Now, um, the reason I said I wanted to emphasize the conversation in the talk last week is because that's where you want to start. It's the same type of conversation. It's just the focus is different, right? You want to avoid going into a conversation out of anger or out of a reaction, right? Because once again, they have neglected their responsibilities. Once again, they have lied to you. Once again, they've broken their promise and you're fed up with it. And you're going to go in there guns blazing like, I'm not going to take this anymore. Right? Some of that energy you need to take it serious. We need to have a talk, but you want to connect with them. Otherwise, they're going to shut down, right? They're going to shut down internally or they're going to fight back. And it's that way that you persistently say, we love you. We care about you. We want you to be successful. We want you to be able to achieve your goals and to move forward. But we really got to talk about what's going on. And then you want to share what you are seeing and get an idea from them, get them to talk and open up about why are you on the internet so much? Why is that so important? Here's what we're seeing, what's going on. Why are you always out with your friends? Why are you drinking this much? Why are you smoking this much? Why are you doing this? And sincerely wanting to know. And you're looking for what is the need? What is the reason that they are doing this? And then it's a conversation about how do we help you? How can we support you when you're feeling this way? And connect with them. And then you get to setting the boundaries. And that's what we're going to spend the rest of the time talking about. And then I'll go over any questions and even respond. Because I know most of you are watching this on replay. Totally fine. And so a lot of times I'm responding to things that people say after the fact. So let's get into setting those boundaries. And again, we don't want boundaries out of anger. We don't want them out of a reaction. We want them to be thought out. We want them to be planned. And it's best if you can do those boundaries, those steps, those goals with your child, with your adult child. Now, if what we're looking for is get them to a place of, you know what, my behavior is too much. Right? This is becoming an addiction. This is becoming a problem. It is holding me back. And that's that loving conversation where you kind of, heart to heart, let's get to the truth here. And then be able to talk about, okay, how can we make some changes, right? What can we do to limit this, to give you something else to do? You start coming up with plans of how are you going to cut back on whatever it is you're doing and focus on these steps moving forward. So it's the same conversation as I was talking about last week, but this one's talking more about how do you stop this behavior and what kind of help do you need? What kind of support do you need? Right? And I was going to say the extreme. I don't mean it to sound dramatic, but kind of on the highest level is where we need help outside of our family. You know, that's where people come to me. That you go reach out to a therapist, you go to a program, you go to groups, you reach out to someone you trust who's been through this. That's more on the higher levels of you need more help than we can give you within this family, within this relationship. So let's talk about what that is, and then you're setting those steps. Um, and so what I get with a lot of parents about setting boundaries is they're like, well, what if they don't do it? What if they don't follow through? And there's a couple points I want to make with that. Right, uh, the boundary is not about control. Right? You're not trying to control the other person. You're actually focusing on controlling yourself more. Right? The boundary isn't about their behavior. It's more about your behavior. So when you're saying something uh, we want you to stop doing this or we want you to do this, you can make that statement, but that's ultimately out of your control. That's their choice. What you're saying with the boundary is we are going to do this, right? Here's what we're going to do. We're going to stop paying for these things, right? We're going to stop providing this. We are going to start checking in with you in this way, right? It's about what you are going to do. And the reason you have that connecting conversation in the beginning is you're not just dropping a limit. You're not just dropping a boundary, like take it or leave it. No, it needs to be a loving conversation. We're trying to help you here. That's your fallback. That's always your fallback. We're trying to help. We care about you. We love you. We're trying to help. And, but this is what we're going to do. And so a lot of them do come out of those places of being, those boundaries come out of places of being burnt, such as you made this promise, you said you were going to do this, we talked about this, or you've done this thing and someone's been hurt by it or whatever, and so that's prompting making a boundary clear, but you still want the heart of that to be we want to help our child. We want to help our son or our daughter move forward and to break this addiction and to get to, moving forward with their life. So I hope that makes sense. If you have more questions, and I get so many questions about boundaries, because what most people are thinking, like even you watching this, is like, well, yeah, but what about this situation? This is our situation. And I'm happy to answer those specific questions. It's just until there's something specific to answer, it's more in general of like this is the foundational principles of setting those boundaries. Um, and I also wanted to make a point that uh, you are likely not a professional, and even if you are professional therapist, professional whatever, or trained or skilled, or you've been through it before, you're most people who are listening are not in that position, so you don't really fully understand what's going on. You're still so important, but you don't completely understand maybe the path forward. But even if you do, you're a family member, right? There's emotion involved. There's you got real skin in the game, and it's often that's too much for you to focus on to be that primary person. So the progression, like I said, is often we need help. And when your child is full blown addicted, I strongly recommend that. I strongly say go to the. I mean, you can start with the smaller boundaries, but when that's not working, it's like, okay, we need more help in many different forms. It doesn't have to be a professional therapist. I know there's plenty of mentors and people in the community, even support groups that are even free, right? There's people who are help, but it's reaching out. It's more about the intent to, this is so important. We've got to make some big changes. All right. That is the bulk of what I wanted to talk about, and believe me, we are going to talk about this again. But it's a really difficult situation, and when you're when you feel like you're cycling over and over and over, broken promise after broken promise, um, the situation, the behavior patterns, it just repeats and repeats and repeats. That's really because there's something more going on, right? You don't either fully understand what is holding, well, that's it. You don't understand what's holding your young person back. And maybe you don't even understand what's happening in your reactions that is kind of perpetuating the cycle, adding to it, right? And so these conversations allow discovery of what's going on with our child, what is going on within us, and that's where you can get to, okay, this is more about addiction, right? They're more focused on maintaining their um, their addictive behavior than they are focused on moving forward. And we need some help. We need to move forward. The I guess the last piece I want to cover, it was the same in the conversation last week. It's the follow through piece, and I do want to make this point. Don't set a boundary that you won't or can't follow through on. And most of the time, when those kind of boundaries, unrealistic boundaries, are set, honestly, they're not necessarily boundaries. They're usually more like threats. That's what we call them. But those are usually formed out of high emotion or just a loss of what to do. So you're just kind of like stabbing in the dark at maybe this will work, maybe we'll hit it with this. And uh, those kind of undermine the whole thing because it sets a precedent of we have a big bark but no bite. We have anger and emotions, but we don't have follow through. I was actually talking with a family not too long ago, and this is a good example. Just popped in my head. Their son was massively addicted to screens and the internet and social media, the phone and games and any kind of stimulation. And it's a common story I've heard. We're getting the wave of like high schoolers and kids that went through COVID and they spent a year or more just on way too many devices and not socializing in real life. And I'm seeing a lot of that generation. The intensity of their internet screen addiction is extreme. I mean, it's just like crack to them or any substance. It's the first thing when they feel discomfort, the first thing when they're feeling any kind of anxiety or tension around anything. It's just, let me look at the screen. Let me look at the screen. Let me look at the screen. And this young man and this family I was talking with this young man, that was very much the case. He just could not stay away from his phone. Like, I was having a conversation with him face to face, and he couldn't not stop looking at his phone, even when you're pointing it out, when you're trying to redirect him, point out the behavior. He could not look at his phone. So the parents, they made a uh, they made a boundary, and it wasn't necessarily bad, but it was extreme from where they were. They just took away every device. They turned off the Wi-Fi. They did all of that, and okay, you don't get any of this until you get a job. And like I said, the premise of it was fine. Get a job, go to school. They had some other things. The premise of it was fine, right? This is what you're using to avoid. We're going to take it away, and go do this, then we can bring it back on. But there were two things with that. One, their son went into complete meltdown because he had no coping mechanisms other than uh, the the internet and the screen and the devices. So he just switched from rage to depression and hopelessness and being extremely stuck. And the other thing was the parents could not handle him suffering like that, and they worried about it, and they very quickly gave back in. They just, like, by the next day, The next time I talked to him, like, I got my screens later that night. I got all my stuff back later that night. I was like, why'd that happen, right? Because it hadn't been thought through, and then that cycle was happening over and over and over. So the boundary and the goal was set too quick, too hard, too much. There wasn't discussion, there wasn't connection around it, and the parents didn't have the tolerance to deal with their son and his distress when he didn't have his addiction. So that's what I'm talking about. You need some guidance. You need some help to see that, um, just the way to set those boundaries. Yeah. So, all right, I'm going to get into a few questions, and I'm going to look and see if we have any other um, things that have popped up here. I don't see any there. So these are some questions that people have sent to me, or I've modified slightly um, because they put in some personal stuff in there. And let me just, I won't do two of them, but they too many of them, but they related to what we're talking about here. And just a moment, I have them on the screen here that I'm looking at. All right, and they're yeah. So this one came up a couple of times. Someone even posted something similar in our group earlier this week as well. So this comment was, we feel like we've tried everything: conversations, consequences, taking things away. Nothing has worked. How do we know when the line is crossed and it's time to ask him to move out? Um, Couple things with that. One, my first thought is always safety. Right? There are times where situations get too volatile, and we're talking about adult children here. Maybe it's becoming violent, or the tension in the home. There's real concern about just the safety of what happens at home. That can often be a sign like, okay, something big needs to change. We need to figure out somewhere else for them to stay, or something to happen, because it's just escalating too quick. And then the other thing is, um, it is a progression. I get a lot of people who ask me just that thing, like, when do we kick them out? A pattern that I see a lot is the family is not having the right conversations, right? Um, they're in the same cycle over and over and over until they just can't take it anymore, and then it gets to that extreme, right, of like, we're going to kick you out. And sometimes it's threats that never happen, and sometimes they actually do have them move out and do that. But there were other opportunities. So my thought is, you really want to know that you truly have done everything. And the one thing that I don't believe I saw in that comment is that they had, it looks like not getting the help of someone else. I mean, that's where I want families like to reach out to a therapist or to someone and say, hey, can you help us have this conversation? That's the next level. But to answer the question a little bit more specifically about when is it time for them to move out, it's really about the effort, right? You've had the conversations, you've tried to get help, you've set the boundaries, and there's no more effort. It's basically someone saying, I am not going to do anything else, and especially if it's on a level of safety or harmful behavior. So we're talking about addiction stuff primarily. Like bringing those things into the home, just some behaviors that aren't acceptable. That's where you start looking more towards, okay, we need to look at another option. Keep in mind, and I know this is a changing of the wording, but I really do believe this, right? It's not as much that you're making them leave as much as they're choosing not to follow that healthy lifestyle. They're choosing not to work on themselves. There's always a chance. There's always choices. You're there to help them. But when everything you've tried in the home, they're not responding to, and you're even trying to get them to help, like go to a therapist or go to a group or whatever it is, and they're not taking that step, right? They're making that choice, right? Because you're saying, here's all these things we're trying to do to help you, but you got to do something. We can't sit here and let you continue to be self-destructive and those type of things. And that is many times the path that someone needs, is they need those hard boundaries to realize, like, no one's going to play this game with me. They're not going to be okay with what I'm doing. And and that's a big component with addiction, is people's tolerance. As long as I can maintain what I'm doing, I can tolerate that it's hurting someone or that I'm not doing my part. And so uh, it becomes enabling even when people don't want it to be enabling. All right, let me get to another question. I'm just going to do three tonight, unless another one pops up here that's relevant. All right. He's up all night, sleeps all day. Common. Refuses to work and is glued to his screens. We keep trying to talk to him, but it feels like he's disappeared into another world. How do you even break through that level of escapism? Sound like someone that heard something before when we talked about using that term, escapism. Um, I hear two things you're asking there. The two things that are being asked is, one, how do we start the conversation? And what I find is many families are afraid of having those conversations, or they do them at the wrong time. They do it out of anger, they do it out of emotion, and not in that loving, intentional way. So many times what it is, uh, maybe it's when you're waking up or they're about to go to sleep, but because your sleep schedules in this scenario aren't aligned, but you're going to them and you're saying, look, we have to talk. And you're just pushing in to that conversation. But you lead with love, you lead with concern, not with anger. The other thing that was being asked in that is how to actually address the escapism, to break through, start changing the escapism, the addiction, that kind of thing. And that's what we were just talking about. It's about how you have the conversation and then setting boundaries that are moving things forward. And I would otherwise just repeat everything we're talking about. All right, last question. How do Nope, sorry. All right, here it is. Every time we bring up the addiction, gaming, weed, and the phone, he gets angry, shuts down, and blames us. He swears he doesn't have a problem. How do we deal with someone who can't even admit what's going on? Okay. Um, First of all, remember denial, right? That just how strong that is. I don't even want to deal with what's happening. I don't even realize I'm lying to myself and to other people. That's always a component on some level of addiction, right? They're minimizing. They don't want to admit that they're really that far out of control. When they can admit, I am that far out of control, then they're in a different place. They're moving out of denial. But when they won't even talk about it, when they won't even admit to that anything's wrong and they're blowing up or running away or whatever it is, that's a big component of it. And that denial is many times there, like I said, to preserve their self-esteem and minimize the shame that they're feeling about what's going on. So there's somewhere in between really truly believing everything's okay, or I can't even look at how things really are because it's going to drop me into such shame. Love and compassion, connection, empathy, that's how you respond to that, right? It's not, you're not in a battle like, absolutely you're addicted, absolutely this is a problem, and you're screwing up, and if you come at it with that hard edge, and I'm not talking about you being in denial of truth. You're still speaking truth, but it's truth with love. It's truth with caring. It's truth with concern. and you're trying to open that door to let's have a discussion, not a fight. Let's talk about what's really going on. Let's not argue. Right? That's what you want. And also remember what we talked about with boundaries. It's about your change in behavior. You're you're at a loss if you're trying to if your goal is to make your son in this case agree with you, to see your point and agree, to say, "Yep, you were right. This is what's happening. I completely admit it." If that's what you're trying to make happen, then they actually have the upper hand because they can say, I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to believe that. And I can tell that you really, really need me to agree with you. And so I'm not going to do that. And then it becomes a full on argument that's not going to go anywhere. So many times, the boundary is something like this. The conversation is like this. Um, we are really concerned about your behavior. We think this has gone too far. We think that um, you are under the control of this substance, or you can't control your internet use, or whatever it is. It is a problem. We see this, and we're really concerned about it. We want to talk about it. And then their child says, "Nope, there's no problem. There's nothing wrong. This is totally okay," or something like that. What the parents need to do in that moment is say, no matter how you see it, we are not okay with this. We are not okay with X, right? We are not okay with you staying up all night, sleeping all day, constantly on the internet, not getting a job, not doing this. We're not okay with that. So therefore, we are going to change our behavior, right? You don't say it quite like that, but that's what you're doing. We are going to stop paying for this, right? Or we are going to require that if you are going to um, have any financial support, you need to be going and talking to a counselor. You need to be doing this thing, right? So it's not about getting them to agree. It's about saying we love you, we care about you, we're not okay with what's happening, and here's what we are going to do about it. Right? That's more of the direction. And it sounds like what was happening in that description is, yeah, he gets angry, he blames, he swears, he doesn't have a problem, and uh, I'm not hearing where anything happens beyond that, right? Because likely the focus is on how do we get them to admit it. Of course, we want that, but you're in that stuck place. So that's what I was going to say. That's what I wanted to share, and that is it for tonight.